With just over a month to go until the US election, there's one topic coming up again and again from the Democrat camp: Project 25. It's a 920-page document filled with policies to make America more Christian and more conservative. And the Democrats are actually worried. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, presidential hopeful Kamala Harris has made Project 25 a key election attack on her rival Donald Trump. The former president is disassociating himself from the document. But what is Project 2025? And why are the Democrats so concerned? And what would it mean ultimately for the American people?
The Heritage Foundation is one of Washington's conservative and right-wing think tanks. And for the past 40 years, they have been publishing a mandate for leadership every election cycle. Project 2025 includes contributions from more than 100 conservative organizations. The Democrats have been using it to garner support as the race for the White House heats up.
The consequences of putting him back in the White House are extremely serious. Extremely serious. Just Google Project 2025. By the way, can you believe they put that thing in writing? I mean, they put it in writing, they had it bound, and they handed it out. And if you get your hands on it or just Google it, let me tell you, it's a detailed and dangerous blueprint for what he will do if he were elected president again.
But Donald Trump has been distancing himself from Project 25, with Kamala Harris challenging her Republican rival during their televised debate.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
Although denying knowledge of it now, the former president has made speeches at Heritage Foundation events in the past, and some of his allies have been involved in shaping the document. But why are Democrats so worried? Project 25 is a wide-ranging document with 4 main pillars: a policy guide for the new administration, a LinkedIn-style database for potential personnel, training for these candidates called the Presidential Administration Academy, and a playbook for actions to take in the first 180 days in office. Project 25 covers topics from immigration, abortion, and climate change. One section Democrats are most concerned about is Schedule F, which would give Trump the power to choose political civil servants who supported his agenda. Democratic leaders view the document as an authoritarian blueprint that could roll back fundamental freedoms and undermine democracy. Only a Trump victory will determine whether the policies in Project 25 are implemented, and Democrats are using it to make sure that never happens.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from London is Kristin Wolfe. She is the chair of Democrats Abroad UK. And here with me in the studio, we have Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. And Kelsey Farish is a media and entertainment lawyer and a leading analyst on generative AI. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Kristin, I'll come to you first. Project 25, there was one sentence that jumped out at me, and it said that it would allow a president to mold America into a conservative Christian state according to their understanding of God's law. I mean, it's 900 pages long, but that's a very interesting sentence to pick out.
Well, in fact, it is. And, you know, the 900 pages contains a lot of interesting things. And I think, you know, the whole point of Project 2025 is to lay out the blueprint of how this particular president and the people around him want to reshape American society in their vision of what an American society should look like. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff in there that actually is not going to be wildly popular with the American people. You know, he wants to remove impartial civil servants and replace them with loyalists. He wants to eliminate things like the Department of Education and, really importantly, the FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is designed to help with natural disasters like we've just seen sweeping across, the southern part of our country. And he wants to have the federal government force states to monitor women who are pregnant and report back. And if the states don't do that, they will lose their federal funding for certain programs. So it's really shocking what they're trying to do with this. It's un-American. And I think this is why it is so important for us to make sure that we are defeating Donald Trump and the MAGA Republican agenda at the ballot box on November 5th.
Greg, just come in on that. It's un-American, Project 25.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, but I also noticed that Kristin said he a lot. He meaning, I would assume, meaning President Trump. And President Trump has disavowed Heritage Project 2025 countless times. So I think it's dishonest when Kamala Harris says Trump's Project 2025.
But he's been pictured with these people.
Well, there's plenty of heritage people that worked for the Trump administration. It is a conservative think tank. So you would hope a conservative president would have alumni that are working there and hopefully future alumni of heritage working in his administration. It is a brand name conservative think tank. It's been around. It was Reagan's go-to think tank. So, but to say it's Trump's policy, he's disavowed it many times. So I think there's some dishonesty there from Vice President Harris. But also the way they portrayed heritage. As I said, it's a think tank. It's conservative. They're going to have different viewpoints even within Heritage Foundation. Now, I wish that the president would adopt more of heritage. I'm a big fan of Heritage Foundation, but President Trump is not as conservative as I am.
So you a fan of 25?
I think there's a lot of intelligence to it. And will much of it be implemented? Probably not. Heritage has taken a bit more of a populist role in this more recently. Kevin Roberts has definitely guided them to a more populist vision, but also they're trying to grasp implementation a little bit more. They're like a consultant. Instead of just writing papers and thoughtful papers, I've agreed with so much of what they've written over the last 40 years, and yet they're trying to be a little bit more activist. So that is a little bit different, and I will fully admit that. However, fundamentally, it's still the old Heritage Foundation. They're conservatives. And if you compare it to the Trump or the GOP platform, for the first time in 44 years, the GOP platform is not pro-life. It doesn't advocate an abortion ban, and it doesn't advocate marriage should only be between a man and a woman. That's new for the Republicans. So the fact that Heritage is still advocating that is just kind of old news, conservative, down the middle, country club Republican. I think Trump is different. He is not as conservative. I wish he was more conservative, but that's not what you're going to get from Trump.
Kelsey, how does the average American feel about this? Because ultimately, people care about the dollar in their pocket at the end of the month, paying bills, educating their children, putting food on the table. Does Project 25 even come into the conversation for the average American voter?
I think in the context that people are starting to obtain more information about politics through social media, it certainly is. I think it's remarkable that much of the attention that we have towards Project 2025 actually started from TikTok. People started picking up on it and discussing it. So I think that people care about it, not least because they're seeing it on social media, but also because the core issues that are being discussed are cultural and social. Things like Christianity or the role of parents in schools, things like woke policies, things like transgender rights and so on. However, you do raise a really important point, which is about the dollar in your pocket. And what I've not seen from Project 2025, rightly or wrongly, is some specific policies with regard to taxation or inflation, things of that nature.
So there's no, Greg, economic policy in Project 25. It's more Christian conservative ideology.
I think there's plenty of economics, but it's traditional mainstream supply side economics, which it's been since the 80s. So that was, again, that was Reagan's go-to think tank. You had Arthur Laffer, you had many of the traditional supply siders, which was kind of a new language in 1980. It's not a new language now, and they're sticking with it. So, that's why, on the economy and inflation, Trump is polling 10 to 20 points higher than Vice President Harris. He was polling even greater, to a greater degree, over Biden. But I think if you look at the heritage on economics, it's classic supply side. We've heard it for 44 years. It's not new. However, I think that Trump might not be as conservative as I'd like in terms of supply side economics.
Kristin, I thought it was very interesting, the whole ideology in Project 25 to have effectively a conservative LinkedIn where civil servants would be monitored for their political beliefs and effectively screened out of working in any particular role if they did not subscribe to the very conservative ideology behind all of this.
It's shocking. And in fact, in conversations with people who are federal employees, they are very worried about what is going to be coming at them should Donald Trump enter the White House again. And, there is already, as part of the Project 2025 efforts, they've been out trying to recruit people to fill these roles. So they've got the machinery in place. They're working on trying to make sure that literally from the moment, if President Trump is reelected, from the moment his inaugural utterance of "So help me God" ends, they want to start the machinery in motion, and they want to start replacing these impartial civil servants, which we know impartiality is the hallmark of any federal agency. It's not supposed to be about loyalty to any single person or to an ideology. It's supposed to be upholding the Constitution of the United States and the people they serve. So this is really, again, it's a very disturbing thing. I also just want to comment a little bit about that economic question that you asked, because although Project 2025 doesn't lay out specific policies relating to economics, it has implications that are quite deep for some people on the economic side. So for again, talking about this abortion question, that policy is completely riddled with how they intend to minimize the role of women in the workplace, how they intend to, make women a feature once again only in the home, and this idea of limiting access to reproductive health care when a woman needs it. All of those are very real economic realities for lots of people in the country. And so there's a lot of things that aren't said in that document that frankly aren't said in the Republican Party's 16-point platform that they've got. But all you need to do is read between the lines, because it's what isn't being said that becomes important.
Greg, just come back in on the issue of conservative LinkedIn. Sure. Is that something you genuinely believe in, that no civil servant can work in an administration if they don't believe what the president believes?
Well, I think there's a limit, right? The Heritage Foundation, as well as conservatives in general, have always advocated for smaller government. And they're frustrated when they do take over and this bureaucracy, which typically leans left, is overwhelming, and they can't really implement change that they want to implement. And I imagine when the Democrats come into an administration and they make their political appointments, there's a lot more comfort from the bureaucracy, but that's not new. Again, now is Heritage maybe being a little bit more pushy on advocating or actually executing? Sure, maybe they are, but that's just consistent with conservative thought, which is that government is too big. And it needs to be reduced. And also, the bureaucrats are unelected. And I think it's much more democratic to argue that the people should be electing representatives, not being governed by this massive bureaucracy. A lot of the stuff that Biden and Harris could not pass through Congress, they passed through the government, the agencies, the EPA, the acronyms. So I think that's important. And I think they're also a bit nervous on the left that Trump is actually coming out as almost the moderate in this election, right? If, again, ignoring Heritage, Trump's abortion policy, for example, is sort of down the middle. He's kind of moved to the center. Economically, he's much more in tune with what the electorate believes. The border, 87% think it's a crisis, 61% think that it's Biden and Harris's fault. So he's kind of like almost too moderate for my tastes, but that's okay. Because right now the policy for the Kristin mentioned abortion, the current policy from Kamala Harris is taxpayer funded up until birth. That polls at 13. It polls at 18 in the Democratic Party. Even here in the UK, which is much more strict than that policy would be, it polls at 16. So this is a moment where the Trump policies are actually mainstream, if I could use that word, as opposed to the Democrat policies, which are considered much more radical.
Kelsey, just come in on the whole conservative LinkedIn thing. Are we reaching a stage in the United States where ultimately you will see a president and his people screening staff's use of social media, or, you know, looking for political commentary and then basically removing people from work?
Sure. So as a lawyer who's studied both European law as well as laws here in the UK, and indeed I'm very familiar with the laws back home in the United States, it's important to stress that laws about what you can and cannot take off of social media, they differ from country to country. So someplace like the United States, an organization to include the United States government is going to have more leeway to take information off of social media. Whereas in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe, there are much stronger protections for individuals. What my personal belief is that if the resource is available, as in if there's information out there online and a government is within its legal rights to scrape that data or to use it to make decisions, it probably will do. That doesn't mean I think it's right, and it doesn't mean that I think it's best practice, but from a legal perspective, I certainly do think that the American government, in whatever shape or form it takes, will probably do what it can within the context of the law to get as much information as it can get.
Kristin, are you worried about that then? That if there were to be another Trump administration, you would see civil servants having all of their posts looked at and, you know, basically just Trump conservative yes people?
Of course. I mean, and with good reason. I mean, your personal profiles are intended to be out there for you and for your network to consider. It's not out there for, you know, the government to come in and screen whether or not you are still a suitable employee or a prospective candidate. That's not really its role. But more alarming is just the fact that existing employees are now fearful that they are going to lose their jobs because of how they may lean, rightly or wrongly, depending on how someone interprets posts on their LinkedIn profiles. That's not right. As I said earlier, this entire thing is completely un-American. And, you know, I think we would be well served, frankly, to stop this at the ballot box on November 5th by just voting Donald Trump and all these mega Republicans right out of office.
Greg, I notice under Project 25, Department of Homeland Security will be dismantled, the FBI will be downgraded, and the Federal Department of Education would also be in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
How can you defend this? Is crazy stuff.
Well, no, I think that, again, Heritage has been advocating for smaller government, and probably those examples have been in place or at least referenced over time. So that's not new. And those are not Trump's policies, by the way. They're Heritage recommendations from a think tank. And even within Heritage, there's different views. So I think it's way overblown. The Democrats have done a really good job of discovering Project 2025 and publicizing it using TikTok and other social media. And I find it's also kind of amusing that they're worried about this conservative LinkedIn at the same time that they've advocated censorship, and we've seen government agencies, again, unelected bureaucrats, working with the White House, working with social media companies to censor information. Hunter Biden laptop was the most obvious example, but there's been others during COVID, especially when you had a real pushback on freedom of speech. And that's not something that, you know, I think conservatives would ever advocate is censorship or any pushback from freedom of speech. And social media, it's a reality right now. I tell my kids this all the time. Don't, you know, if there's anything you don't want known, you know, or repeated, don't put it on social media.
Just come in on that, Kelsey. I mean, we've, a matter of weeks left. How big is social media going to be in the next few weeks in the United States in terms of convincing people either way?
I'd assume that by now most people have made up their minds as to whether or not they're going to vote one way or another. And indeed, voting has already started. I will say, however, that it's never too late to change someone's mind. And a lot of the money that's being poured into campaigns is ending up right on social media because it's right there in front of the viewer. So I definitely think that social media will continue to be an extremely important aspect of the campaign, if not the most important.
Kristin, I'll just come to you. I mean, when it comes down to it, when people go to their polling booths and they're casting their votes, do you think Project 25 will play on a lot of people's minds, or is it just always about the economy in the United States?
Well, the economy is certainly an important issue. I mean, we can't get away from that. And Vice President Harris has laid out a very detailed plan on what she will do to help middle class families get ahead, and not only get ahead today, but get ahead to create wealth that they can pass on to their children and grandchildren. So a bit just frankly like Donald Trump was able to inherit from his father, we'd like the rest of the country to be able to do similar types of things. But, you know, when it comes to social media and what is happening, I mean, what the role of social media here really is getting young people motivated to vote who maybe for the first time are voting, who haven't previously using social media to create awareness of this, and what Project 2025 is all about. We've heard repeatedly, even just here, you know, Donald Trump does want to distance himself from Project 2025, yet the Heritage Foundation, which he's trying to distance himself from, was the very same group that he helped credited when he rolled back the protections of Roe versus Wade through the appointment of 3 very conservative Supreme Court justices that he knew once they were nominated and approved, they were going to repeal Roe versus Wade. And they did just that. And he was proud of that. He thanked the Heritage Foundation for giving him all the advice that he needed on how to do it. And now here we are today. And that issue is one that is going to motivate women and male allies to get back out into the voting booths and to vote for a candidate who is going to restore the constitutional rights that women have had for 50 years. And thanks to Donald Trump, they've lost.
Greg, just on that point about Trump rowing back from Project 25, why do you think he's distancing himself from it?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is, and by the way, I'm perfectly happy that he's proud of the work that Heritage did and the Federalist Society, of course, in 2016 about rolling back Roe v. Wade. Even you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg considered it really poor law. But more importantly, looking forward, I think that he will work with anybody. He'll listen to anybody. It doesn't necessarily mean that Heritage could come in, and that's where I think they got too aggressive. They can't come in and tell Trump what to do. You know, Donald Trump doesn't work that way. He fired Chris Christie in early 2017 when Chris Christie had an entire plan for the transition, and then he fired him, and it was kind of a messy transition because of that. He's not one to take advice, you know, and just do everything he's told. He likes to listen to a number of different inputs and then make a decision. So I think he felt a little pressured from Heritage. I think they maybe overstepped a little bit, and I think the Democrats did a good job of making it an issue. And all of a sudden, it's on the front page of the paper. I've been at speaking events at boarding schools, at high schools, where the kids, via TikTok, knew about Heritage 2025, where very few people outside of the conservative world, the conservative nerds like me, that actually follow Heritage, but most people had never heard of it. So it's not something that Trump will implement blindly. He's said that many times. This is almost like the Charlottesville hoax, the bloodbath hoax. If you go with a narrative enough, you say it enough times, people will start to believe it. And I think the low information voters now will go to the polls thinking about Heritage 2025, and they never would have heard of it 6 months ago.
Kelsey, on that point then, do you think the Democrats have done a really good job publicizing this online, social media, getting it out there?
I think President Biden telling people to Google Project 2025 was a great move because he's not necessarily saying something about it, but he's empowering the American people to do their own research. And quite frankly, it's in black and white, isn't it? Whether Trump will follow what's written there or whether he'll have the ability to overcome the legal challenges that will undoubtedly accompany some of these policy initiatives remains to be seen. But what we do know is that people are talking about it. And again, if this takes people to the polls where they otherwise might not have, I think that can only be a good thing.
Kristin, we live in an age where people have a very short attention span. I mean, a 900-page document nowadays just does not break through.
It's 900 pages, and Donald Trump himself has said he hasn't read it, but we know that from his former advisors he never read anything. So I don't think we can necessarily expect people to go out and read the whole thing, but you only need to read the introduction, and you'll get a real flavor for the tone. It's not just the content, but it is the tone and the approach that they want to use to basically control people's lives.
Greg, final point to you. We're into the last few weeks now. How's your man looking? And if he becomes president again, is Project 25 going to be implemented?
No on the implementation. I can promise you that, because he doesn't implement anything that comes directly from a think tank. He might implement some of it, and I think that's wise because I like a lot of it. However, I think the election's too close to call right now. If he sticks to the two issues that are most important to Americans right now, one is inflation and the economy. Two is the border crisis. He's leading on those two issues by 10 points plus. Foreign policy is up 5. He's 9 out of the 10 Gallup issues from last week's poll he's leading on. If he can stick to the issues, he'll win. If he gets distracted, he could very, very easily lose.
Greg, Kelsey, Kristin, thank you all so much for your insight on this. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.